Hello.
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 How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Oh, I'm pretty good. We are, for the first time, face-to-face in our podcast/video attempt, and I'm feeling excited.
We have, I was going to say fake flowers,
They are
but then I
fake.
got worried they were real.
No,
Okay.
they're fake. They're fake, but they're like high-quality fake.
It's a whole different thing.
So I think it's a different thing. This vase was very expensive, for example. We've got a whole new technological system worked out, so
we're about to take off.
I think we're about to take off. Yep. So, thank you
For being there from the beginning.
Thank you to our friends. You were there when we were on Zoom. You were there when our mics didn't really work, and Kate had the screen kind of not really covering the whole background. It was a bit aesthetically aggravating.
Now I find out.
It's good to give critical feedback several years later.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. So what are we doing?
We fairly recently read Carol Hooven's Tea.
Yep.
And Cordelia finds Testosterone Rex.
Yep.
And we did read them in that order. I'm not actually sure why we decided we wanted to read both of them.
I think you and I had long been saying that we should do a Fine versus Hooven, or Hooven versus Fine.
Yeah. Maybe
video or discussion, or maybe I don't know if we were planning to write something, but we had an idea for a long time of doing them together. And then I think we proposed to our reading group.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. That we would do it because then we get a philosophy team.
And Will, who's in our reading group, wanted to read Hooven because he hadn't read that and he'd read Fine.
Yes, right.
So we ended up reading both in the reading group. We read Hooven first and then we read Fine.
Yes.
Which is sort of interesting because that's reversed chronological publication order.
Yeah, so this is 2017, if I'm remembering correctly. Is that right?
Yeah,
2017, and that's 2021.
Yes. So, yes, but they read a little like Fine is responding to Hooven.
Yeah, so one thing we noticed was often in the discussion, we'd read we'd read Hooven and kind of discussed that, but then when we it doesn't make sense, does it?
No, okay. Did we have that experience when we read Fine of it's satisfying because we read Hooven first and then we read Fine and we found that satisfying because she's responding to so much in Hooven, except then we were thinking, well, but she's not responding because she's preceding Hooven.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've got this very vivid memory of when we were discussing Hooven, Will often saying, okay, and this is what Fine's response would be, right? But it might be because he had previously read Fine and remembered it well enough that even though the Hooven book comes later, she's presenting this view to which Fine has responded.
Yeah.
And he was... So somehow the dialectic for us ended up very fixed, right?
Yes.
On it looked like... You're right that then the Fine was felt like a very satisfying response to Hooven.
Yeah.
A lot of the things that had come up in Hooven's discussion were then kind of taken up and given
scientific studies debunked or assumptions questioned.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you sort of had the feeling that okay, yeah, that is quite a satisfying response, or that takes care of that worry.
Yeah.
So maybe I'm slightly mixing up two things, it coming up while reading Hooven that Fine has some ways to respond to that.
Yeah.
And then it very much coming up for us in the reading of Fine.
Yeah.
That this addresses a lot of what had come up for us in the book before. I think that's probably right. And then I think we both got a little, or at least I felt a little we ended up writing a review of Hooven's book for Fairy Disputations. And one of the complaints that we made there was Hooven's not, because of this thing about the chronology, Hooven is not really advancing the discussion.
Yeah.
In a sense, it felt to us
restatement.
Hooven was restating the original testosterone view that Fine then came along and called the T-Rex view
Yeah.
and was at pains to murder in her book.
Yeah.
And so we sort of made the case for that in the review. And all of that is a long way of saying we are now no longer planning to do a Fine v. Hooven.
Yeah. We're going to do just fine.
Yeah. We are setting Hooven aside and we're just going to discuss Fine. So maybe for anyone who hasn't like remotely even seen this book before, it's just worth saying the subtitle, Unmaking the Myths of Our Gendered Minds. And that does sort of maybe point to a matter of emphasis in sex differences, in, what behavior, disposition, attitude, stuff that's connected to the mind and not the body alone. Psychology. Yeah, exactly. And the myth being this idea that, how would you put that? That there are like two very different types of human psychologically.
Yeah, because so what she this is what the view she's trying to take down.
Yeah,
it's that biological sex doesn't just create two different reproductive systems. It creates these two different types of people.
Yes,
two different minds, psyches, psychologies, sets of behaviour. Yeah. Yeah,
I think that's right. And maybe so the thought is like, maybe pre-scientifically, is that fair? That people just have the sense that men and women are very different types of, and to the extreme. I mean, she quotes at a certain point an academic saying they're nearly two different species.
Yeah, or they're like men are from Mars, women are from Venus.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you've got that kind of popular view about the difference, and there's many ways to try to account for it or explain it. And one tempting way is to say that it's created by the sex hormone differences.
Yeah.
So women get the burst of estrogen and men get this burst of testosterone. That's the difference maker. The men have the testosterone and the women don't, or the levels are so vastly different. And so these are the things that are the makers of the difference.
Yeah.
And then that's her target in the book, to just take on that kind of popular idea, but really tackle the science of its plausibility, right?
Yeah. And importantly to say that you don't have to deny like evolution or what else? Isn't she trying to say, you don't have to, or like, I don't know, claim humans are exceptions in just like strange or unjustifiable ways?
Yes, exactly, yeah.
You can keep an evolutionary story.
Yeah. Yeah, I think maybe that's responding to some of the caricatures, like, you could have a feminist blank slate theory, where those guys just completely deny evolutionary history or the role of any of the, like, do you call it biochemical processes going on, and just sort of dogmatically insist that humans are all the same.
Yeah.
She's sort of saying, no, once you really pay sophisticated, nuanced attention to the details, like, of how these evolutionary mechanisms work and then what the biochemical systems are like,
it actually all makes sense.
And it doesn't remotely prop up this two totally different types of person. And it's bringing in some animal stuff too, so not just person, but it's like, what role are these sex hormones playing? She's caring more about the human, I guess, but she's drawing on some.
And what she's trying to, she's sort of, I guess, showing that it's more complicated than it's been said to be in the animal kingdom.
Yeah.
And I guess she's doing that because what this popular view is what it's a view like yielded by an evolutionary story and like ostensibly verified by like observations of the animal kingdom.
Yes. Yeah.
So
it's interesting, isn't it? Because this is almost, I know then we say we're not going to talk about Hooven, but this is really something that comes up, like, because Hooven then talks about, I don't know if you remember the list, we have it in our review, right? But
of the animals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like there's this very wide range of animals, and then she kind of asserts the human is no exception.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So you're sort of, you're primed to think, well, if testosterone's doing this job and playing this role
in all these other animals,
chickens and lizards,
and like a wide variety of them.
Yes, and then if the human male also has testosterone, and you also see him doing some of those kinds of behaviour as well, surely the parsimonious explanation is the same stuff is going on for the human male.
Yeah, that's right. So Fine is saying, actually, that's not what's going on so consistently or across the animal kingdom.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So if you see that it's even more complicated in almost every species you could be interested in the animal kingdom, it's even easier to accept that it's very complicated when it comes to the human.
Yeah.
But I do think, is that fair that her interest is kind of ultimately in the human, and that it's maybe a little clearer than when you read Hooven? Maybe you could say Fine's.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Fine's mobilizing all that work to say something eventually about the human sex difference in the psychology. And maybe you could read Hooven as just like generally interested in testosterone everywhere.
Yeah. I wonder if the difference too reflects the difference in how they think about people. Like Hooven thinks more about people in the sense of Homo sapiens.
Yep.
Whereas Cordelia thinks more about people in the sense of like enculturated human beings.
Yeah, but then what does that mean in the sense of like, what's the charitable way to think about what Hooven's doing? That makes sense. Like, what is Homo sapiens without
all the human
what it's
stuff.
actually like? Yeah, because it's not as though there is just like the minimal ape, and then with some like very thin veneer of other stuff pasted on depending on the time and place, right?
Yeah.
Or
do you mean like since things now are the way, since we've evolved the way we have, what's the point of thinking about that, or thinking about what he would do in Homo sapiens?
But I think I'm even confused, like what are you invoking when you say the difference between Homo sapiens and person? How did you put it?
Oh yeah, okay.
Are you because of course it's true that there are some stories like, you know, our evolutionary history was stable for a certain amount of time, and then we're adapted to that period of time, and that's always like at least 10,000 years ago.
Yeah.
So are you thinking like Homo sapiens is that guy?
Yeah.
And then we've got all this amazing recent like technology and development and civilization and culture.
Yeah.
But all of that is too recent history for us to be evolutionarily adapted to it. So is that the distinction you're making? Like the hunter-gatherer man is Homo sapiens, and Kate and Holly in their fake flowers studio
persons. I think that is the distinction I'm making.
Anything Cordelia is interested in the persons,
but I mean, now that I think that's like mischaracterizing Hooven, though, right? Because she is trying to say we're going to misunderstand the men versions of Kate and Holly, like men persons.
Yes,
aren't we? If we don't really understand how testosterone works.
I think so, because even though Hooven talks more about testosterone across the whole animal kingdom, she does still have a chapter on violent men.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so she is still, I think, probably less than Fine interested in the human.
Yeah.
But still wants to say something about the human, and wants to, I think, make a political intervention into like, oh, these tea-skeptic feminists.
Yeah.
I do really get the sense of that. Like, she's naming certain of them, and she's kind of admonishing that, like, if only they were taking the science more seriously, they would understand men better.
Yeah.
And that's men the persons, right?
No, that's right. Yeah. And she is, or at least it's like suggesting some, I don't know what similarities in behaviours between like, male chimpanzees.
Yes.
And male persons.
Yeah. That's interesting. Maybe that's like one way to, I think, if you really focus on that distinction between the like what the male human is evolutionarily adapted for versus like all the more recent history that's got to be more superficial than that in a sense, at least you can get a interesting disagreement going about what man is really like or something.
Yeah,
It makes a
yeah.
bit more sense of this idea that like he is by his nature.
Because you think it's fair to say all the recent stuff is more superficial. Is that what you mean?
I think on that view, yeah, if that's your view,
Okay,
that like,
yeah.
um,
But then to like project us way into the future,
yeah,
then that won't be such a reasonable view, though.
yeah, and I'm not even sure if it really is anyway, because what like a lot of the counterpoint, like the evolutionary biologists or whatever will tend to say is that we're just really plastic.
Yeah.
Like it's not that like we've had to deal with such like huge environmental catastrophes, and like humans throughout history have had to adapt really like to these strikingly different circumstances and build lives in really different conditions.
So if there's a thing that we have to have as our nature, it's like it's adaptability.
It's adaptability, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's so if that's we're clever enough as a species to really adapt and find new ways to survive in these totally wild, like Antarctica versus like the desert or whatever.
Yeah.
If that's our nature, it's just a very different picture, and that would allow you to say like the plasticity means that we really interact with our environments at a time in a certain way that makes us what we are, and we could be many different ways. It just is a way of sort of rejecting that story that like, oh, however we were adapted as the hunter-gatherer and the division of labor there is like essentially
yeah. And then I think you also don't get the like deep versus superficial stuff so much, or maybe it's just the plasticity is the deep stuff. But I feel like we no longer have that image.
No, agreed, we don't, and that's kind of good, right?
Yes,
We're plastic, or we're malleable, we're adaptable, but that doesn't give you any determinate content.
Yeah.
How you will end up being will depend a lot on the environment you end up in, and then all the cultural learning that's scaffolded once you're born into that environment, and your parents and elders are like teaching you how to get by.
Yeah.
And then you grow up the kind of person who knows how to get by.
Yeah.
In a snowstorm or whatever.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah. And somehow a much more like optimistic, maybe that's not a reason, but a more optimistic view of the human.
Yes. No, I know. But on that, I did quite like Hooven's point. I think she made that point somewhere in her book about, like, someone, was that about her dad actually getting a diagnosis of cancer?
Didn't she say a bit more?
Doesn't she say something like, it's about getting like terrible news of like a cancer diagnosis, and it's like, oh, that's a bleak outlook. That's not a reason to reject it. Am I totally fabricating that?
Oh no, I just have a bad memory, so it's perfectly possible that was it.
She just, I thought, told this. Yeah, I feel like it was a personal anecdote, and just toward the end of the book, made this point, and that was like, I don't know, a good reminder, or there are contexts in which we want to say like hopefulness is not appropriate language, or
no, I see what you're saying.
So actually that's just diluted, or
yes, if the evidence overwhelmingly supported the idea that like human by its nature really is just this thing that for our long stable period of development more than 10,000 years ago, which the archaeological and anthropological evidence shows to be stable.
across the animal kingdom, we have no reason to think humans are the same in this regard.
Exactly. Like we should be open to the evidence on that. But it's just that there's a compelling story to be told, and I think Cordelia is one of the people telling it. There are many others. That's not our only compelling evidence-based view of the human. And so
and then do you think then it's important to think about something like the possibilities yielded by each of the different stories, because if it's less clear, if there are real questions like hovering over that one, and if this one is what is more optimistic, then optimism counts in its favour.
It's a good question. Like,
I guess I just think about it because I feel like I will ad hoc invoke hopefulness.
No, I see what you're saying, and I think it's a good challenge, and I'm not sure if I should agree that maybe even if the evidence is perfectly balanced for two competing hypotheses, should optimism be your tiebreaker? I don't know. It's kind of appealing, but maybe
Yeah,
there's
I
more
do. I have
think
to.
through.
Yeah, and I definitely think in the case of that is how I think about feminism, or that like why we should be feminists.
I was just thinking that, yeah, but it's not quite optimism, right? It's
What is openness, fear of closing off, possibility. You should you should choose opening the possibility of opening something up over the possibility of closing something off.
I think when I've thought about it in terms of injustice. Like, you should err on the side of equality, or you should err on the side of assuming this thing that makes people really different from each other is an injustice, and then only when you have sufficient evidence that it really absolutely definitely isn't should you.
Yeah, but I wonder what gets that assumption off the ground. Because like there are surely cases where it's really like no one should just assume that like a cat and me are equal or something, should they?
Yeah. No, it's fair. Like, what are the limits of that assumption even? But if you just buy it for humans, yeah, I mean, immediately counterexamples, right? Like, hey, is the person in a permanent vegetative state? I should assume that they're my intellectual equal until proven otherwise.
Yeah, I guess that's.
But then
the
still,
other thing,
maybe yes, like what would the consequences of that assumption be? If they would be to like, well, don't close off their life.
Yeah,
yeah. But it's true, because you do get to these tiebreaker things where like the evidence is not in yet, and you have to decide what you want to work for, maybe. So it's like, and this maybe does also help with the Fine v. Hooven. There's something in my discomfort maybe that I haven't like quite figured out yet, but it's like Cordelia is. Sorry, I keep saying Cordelia. Fine.
No, yeah. What is it? It's like that. It's such a great first name. Deserves to be said.
Maybe.
That, yeah.
So sorry if anyone is getting lost when we say. So it's Cordelia Fine.
Or she's like the third Minogue sister or something, and she just gets a bit like Kylie.
Yeah,
Danny.
true. Famous
Cordelia.
enough to just be Cordelia. There is no other Cordelia.
Holly.
I think in King Lear maybe there's a Cordelia. Anyway, she's a feminist, right?
Yes.
So for me, it's like you read Delusions of Gender, the book before this one, or you read this book, you really get a sense that like she's doing meticulous synthesis of science work, but she's doing it in the interests of women.
Yeah.
Trying to fight against this myth that women are a totally different kind of thing to men, and that myth then vindicates why there aren't as many women in the status quo. And so that's very different. Like, she's doing all this stuff and being evidence responsive and holding up academic standards, but she's doing it for women.
Yeah.
And
that's different to what?
Well, it feels different to what Hooven's doing, whatever that is. And I don't know if that's fair.
Yeah. I know, like, I can't quite work out how to think about their projects in relation to one another.
Yeah.
But I wonder if Hooven would say, she's doing something like, I don't know, she's doing something like that for men, or, I mean, maybe not even just for men.
She's doing something like that for men.
Yeah, or like, or if feminism's, telling women lies, it's not in anyone's, like, I guess, if you frame it as, I don't know what, as like possibilities or potential, then you are closing something off and doing something not in someone's interest. But if you really think those possibilities aren't there, then you're doing something dangerous. And you're misleading people.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely get myself in the headspace of like, men and women really are different, and it is because testosterone / estrogen. You find it's funny to say estrogen because literally no one ever talks about that. It's like, men are different because men have T.
Yeah.
As though, okay, I'm trying to make it equal.
Yeah.
I'm starting a new
We've
thing.
got a thing too.
My book will be called E. My book coming out soon. The Queen Maker.
And the protagonist in the evolutionary story you tell will be the cichlid or chicklid fish.
We forgot to look it
Google
up.
it. Which hails from the lakes of East Africa and is responsive to its environment.
We don't know how to say it, but we know where it's from. This fish. Okay, I forgot my point.
Sorry.
No.
That cut you off.
We're moving slowly, aren't we?
Yeah.
So maybe we should move on to...
Yeah.
Have we kind of given an overview?
I think we have.
Would you say?
Yeah.
That'll do. That'll do.
Yeah, enough. Okay.
Okay, so what we're going to do next, we're going to talk about the
2 big ideas.
2 big exciting, and this doesn't
2
mean,
things we found exciting.
again, Fine might not say, if you put her on an interview about the book and you said, what do you think the 2 main ideas of the book?
These
Probably
are
she wouldn't name these. These are like 2 feminist philosophers with whatever their idiosyncratic preferences are, the thing that they found the most intriguing and exciting. Yeah.
Okay, so the first one was the compensation principle.
Yes. For any of our, shall we call them fans? Even though they really aren't.
Viewers?
For any of our viewers/listeners who have the book and want to follow along, it's we are turning now to page... Is it 94?
I think it's 94.
94.
Yes, 94. Yeah.
Compensation.
Okay, so shall we start here? What if the purpose of some sex differences in the brain were to counteract other differences?
Intriguing question.
Okay, and so what's the...
And then restatement of that same sort of idea on the next page maybe is helpful. So bearing in mind, now she's quoting someone else, that male neural systems have evolved to control behavior most optimally in a male body, and likewise for females, blah, blah, blah. We can't assume that neurobiological sex differences always act to create differences in behavior. Sometimes they may in fact serve to iron them out.
Yeah, okay, so...
What's the general idea?
Yeah, so what's the general idea on what, like, I guess, what's the sort of, I don't know, intuition or assumption that's challenging? The general idea is that that sex differences could be what producing different means to the same ends.
Yes. We have 2 different kinds of biological body, 2 different reproductive systems. And instead of thinking they're different and then they stay that different or they become more different, you think that they also include mechanisms that compensate for the differences between them and bring them ultimately back closer together.
Yes, yeah,
sameness.
yeah, and what helped them to like coordinate, and that's why we behave, or we are and behave so similarly in lots of ways.
Yes, so this kind of observation, right, about like, well, men and women are constantly like living and working together.
Yeah,
they're not separated.
Yes, yeah,
and because they need to be similar enough to be able to like have that shared life.
Yeah,
it's not shocking to expect mechanisms that bring them back.
No, that's right.
Together.
I think why I really like this or was taken by it is because I guess I tend to think if you difference goes with difference and sameness with sameness. So so I guess the intuition is you have these sex differences, so you're going to have these very, like, the end result is going to be very different,
yes.
And then the temptation is to try and find sex sameness. Then if you want to try and find like sameness in behaviours or something, you want to look for sex sameness. But the point here is like, no, maybe you need to have some sex differences to achieve the similarity of behaviour.
Yes, given that you're starting somehow from a different point. I think that's right. And it's interesting, right, because in research, if you didn't observe that possibility, you might end up prematurely concluding like that these two sexes or whatever you're talking about are really different because you're only ever looking for, well, if they're the same, we'll find the same brain region. Or we'll find the same chemical processes or whatever.
Yeah.
And so this is like a whole new idea of like, no, we need to look for if there's eventual similarity in behavior or in something in the world, look for very different paths that might be creating it.
Yeah. Because it did make me think about testosterone in sport.
Yeah.
Because isn't that thing, I guess we think, yeah, that what, like, for me to be able to say that women are capable, like, I don't know, equally athletically capable of something, I would need to find, like, the same, I don't know, what amount of testosterone or whatever in men. But couldn't it be the case, I don't know, does this, like, sort of permit the possibility that women could have something that allows them to get to that end, but it's not testosterone? Because it won't do the work it does in the male body and the female body.
Yes, I think it does allow that possibility. I don't know how it plays out once you then know all the details of, like, because this is a very general point at this,
Yes, yeah.
as we've explained it so far, right? Just like there could be compensating mechanisms between two things that are initially quite different that bring them close together.
Yeah.
And then we'd have to go through with like a sports scientist and a
Yeah.
sport body
Yeah.
expert
Yeah.
whether there are other sorts of what hormones,
Yeah.
things that are capable of like
Doing that
being an
work
alternative pathway for the female. But I think the abstract general possibility certainly is there, right?
Yeah.
Which it's kind of
something
more
to think
optimism.
about. But okay, so there's a helpful example, which is the African forest weaver bird.
Yeah.
So in this bird, the first thing to say is what, like, Fine says, songbirds represent one of the few success stories in linking sex differences in the brain to sex differences in behaviour. And the example there is of the canary. So in the canary bird, it must be that only the males sings, and this is consistent with the fact that the male has a bigger and denser song control brain region.
Yep.
But then in this other species, the African forest weaver bird, the males and the females sing together in unison.
Yep.
And the question is like, oh, how can they both do that, given that the song control region of the brain is bigger and denser in the males?
Yep.
And how it works is that, so Van Fine is sort of retelling this from Foster Sterling's book, that in the female bird, the genes involved in song production areas produce brain-altering proteins at a much higher rate than in males, compensating for their smaller neural real estate. So it's just like doing really hard work. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And that just cancels out. So that cancels out the difference in size of the region of the brain. And
again, if you only looked at the region of the brain or whatever to try to make your prediction, your prediction would be the males are going to be the much better, superior singers. Then you're confounded by the fact that they're singing together and equally.
Yeah. I'd sort of be interested to know, like, how many songbirds did we not know? It starts off by saying, like, songbirds the success story. Now I want to know, like, but how many songbirds really is the girl also singing and no one noticed it? Because there are other like moments in this book where scientists talk about seeing things but not noticing them because they didn't have the context for them.
Yes, interesting.
Or dismissing them as anomalies or something like that.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Yeah.
I mean, I guess so long as there's just a noticeable difference, right? Like she talks about the canary, the males having superior singing. Maybe that leaves open. I just don't know about canaries enough. Maybe there's still some like murmuring or whatever.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
But so long as there's a clear sex difference in the like loud, bold ones and the little chirpers or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right, whereas these are singing in unison. Yeah, where it's not just like, oh, the girl's singing, she's singing too.
Exactly. It's like,
she's good too.
Yeah, so that was cool. So that's cool idea number one. And when we think about that in the case of humans, it is going to really change the research program, right? Because it's going to say there's lots of ways in which... I mean, actually, it's interesting what you look for, right? Because if it was straightforward like it is in the birds, you see an equal outcome.
That's right. And I guess what I'm wondering is it complicated? Well, you won't see... Yeah, what a feminist is going to say, you probably won't see... Why think you would see an equal outcome given that we've done the patriarchy,
Exactly. So with the birds, you can start from the equal outcome,
and then
notice the different brain or
you
whatever,
need an explanation for that,
and then look for what the compensating mechanism must
Yeah.
have been. And also it's more straightforward because the birds aren't really going to have a complex culture and socialization process.
Yeah.
But then for humans, you're more likely to observe difference. And then the question is, what is the best explanation of the difference? And it could turn out really complicated, right? Like Cordelia could be right that actually, if the compensating mechanisms had worked as they ought to have, we would have ended up back at similarity. But nonetheless, fucking patriarchy got in the way
Yeah.
and really like distorted some
Yeah.
outcome of a mechanism. You know, there could
Yeah.
be something like
Yeah.
that where then we never got the comparable sameness to even start getting the research
No, to notice that. Yeah, that's right. I know. Yeah. So we have to look for both. No. Yeah. Or we have to speculate about what the similarities might be.
Yes, we have to
In
speculate,
feminist society, and then we
try
have
to
to
vindicate them, work back,
Yeah.
trying to show what the compensating mechanisms could have been
Yeah.
had they worked properly,
Yeah.
speculate about what got in their way,
Yeah.
do a feminist intervention on the things that you think are getting in the way. It's a lot, right?
It's a lot. Yeah. Yeah.
But again, it's like very feminist work because it opens up these possibilities again, that there are just alternative explanations for all these differences that we see that are not the true expression of the nature of the male and female given their long evolutionary history and T differences.
Yeah, and sex differences can result in similarity.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this yesterday, whether the, like the complementarity view.
Yeah.
Whether the I don't know what are the two people going to say? Yeah, but the differences are like the sort of differences that help us coordinate. Because the differences make the sexes complementary, and it's the complementarity is like crucial to how we get on.
Yeah, but the complementarity story, notice, it's going to work a lot better if you buy the 10,000 years ago hunter-gatherer story. Because at least there was more of a sensible division of labour given what child rearing was like.
Yeah.
So complementarity served a real purpose there.
Yeah.
In a way that it just absolutely does not, since nation states.
Yeah, okay, why not?
Because then you just don't need, then you've just got, people need to do all sorts of labour to keep the society together.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily sex differentiated. So you just get women and men can be more and more doing the same job, fulfilling the same role with this kind of minor disruption of these are the ones, well maybe it's not minor, but these are the ones that get pregnant. Something like Mary Harrington's what does she call it? Shareholding, share. The household where you make the cheese or whatever. That's
small, I don't know.
Yeah, then you can really just have a happy. The man and the woman don't need to be very different at all in that homesteading or whatever it's called, I think. Right?
No, I think that's right. I guess I end up seeing them it's hard for me not to see them having the quite different complementary roles in that home.
But literally every job in a homesteading situation could be done by either sex.
No, that's true.
So then for me, I just think it's the complementarity view makes the most sense as a solution to a coordination problem.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
In a particular environment. And we don't have that environment anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. No, why was I thinking about it? I guess because this is a response to but we have to be a bit the same and get on, right? As though the difference is people are I don't know, painting us as different in ways that make us antagonistic or something. And they're going to say, we're different, but we're not different in ways that make us antagonistic. We're different in ways that make us complements.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. And the more that they can lean on that the harmonious difference, then we should not expect to see sameness at the end in the humans at least, and we should not even need to bother starting to track back to what might explain. Yeah. So I'd love to see that though, Cordelia versus the difference feminists. That would be lovely.
Yeah.
And then sexy idea number 2. Why did I just call it sexy?
Because that's what you do when you're in a studio.
Too intellectual. His idea of sexiness
It's
is
about a
getting
fish.
a little intellectually agitated. What was the second one called? Causal.
No, well, maybe that is a good seg to another idea about what is sex.
Oh.
Is it just mating?
Oh yeah. Do you want to say a little bit more than that? Because I feel like I know what you mean. Maybe the.
No. Okay. Because so this comes up earlier in the Fine book. She makes this distinction between sex as the human activity as which we now know it,
Mm-hmm.
Versus mating, and I guess pointing out that the Hooven people lump all of it together, or they think of it. Yeah, or they're trying to make sense of a lot of our current sexual practices in terms of reproduction.
Got it. And does mating then refer to this thing that happens across the animal kingdom where the imperative is just to reproduce and advance your species?
Yes.
And then sexual practice is absolutely everything that the human person has done with that practice.
Is sex.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if they're not one and the same, then I think that I don't know what reproductive roles would make sense of sexual practices in human society.
Do you mean, if they're so different, why is Hooven offering an explanation of sex in terms of explanations of lizard kingdom mating?
Yes.
That's just totally the wrong tools to address the wrong issue, because the issue
I guess
of
insofar
sex
as
is
she
huge
is, right?
and
And I suppose what I have in mind is sexual violence and things like that, right? Or male promiscuity, men sleeping around.
Yes.
Why I think that's got anything to do with mating or reproduction.
Yes, agreed. This is a general criticism of so much of that, evolutionary psychology thinking, right? It's it's one tool, and it goes everywhere.
Yeah.
So it's the men, the coy females, and then the men needing to compete to be the ones that they choose, and everything comes out of that logic.
Yeah.
And no matter what you're interested in, sexual harassment in the workplace, they can come up with a story for you.
Yeah.
And so it's a bit.
But is that different to any other, or big theoretical frameworks, like feminism or Marxism?
Well, I want to say no, it's not like feminism, and yes, it's exactly like Marxism. You're right. Big theories are often aggravating in that way. They have an answer to everything, and it's the same one theory answer.
I know.
So it is annoying, and it feels a bit stoltifying.
Except I feel now a little aggravated at you because I get annoyed with. I love the bigness. I just always wanted feminism to be big like Marxism, or to be able to do all of what Marxism can do. And I get annoyed at the feminists who are it's totalizing.
Oh, I get. Okay.
But I do take your point in that it does start to put I don't know what, reductive, and maybe a bit cheap or too easy.
I don't think I have ever used the word totalizing. I don't object to theories being big, ambitious, comprehensive.
Yeah.
But I object to evangelizers. So I object to people who have rehearsed the dogma of a theory, whether it's a religious theory or the tenets of whatever the Wittgenstein, or so you take a theory and you treat that person as your idol and you memorize their principles or claims, and then you just rehearse them at everyone who ever has a question.
Everything, yes,
You're always
projecting it.
spectacles, exactly.
Yeah,
so I find those kind of people extremely tedious.
Yeah.
I don't want to be the kind of person myself who everything is just a formula. Who just always, what would a consequentialist say? Just find that boring. And so I think I do have that frustration about evolutionary psychology. And maybe I'm just being a dick about, but the feminists are just as bad. Or because I don't do feminism properly, then I think, well, feminism's not that bad, because feminism... because you're not doing it properly. I don't know.
No, I do know what you mean, and certainly like there's a point which it just starts to seem, and their explanations maybe aren't very. Or if I think I don't know about like some of the Marxist accounts of rape or frustrated, like they're just not explanatorily very good.
Right.
So maybe there's just also, and maybe that's part of your frustration that the evolutionary people can't just say like, oh, that's not a thing for us to explain, or we can't.
Or
We don't have very
here's our
illuminate.
explanation again. It's just like, God.
Yeah.
And maybe this is, I mean, even like anyone who's learning this is going to sound so dismissive, sorry. The point I want to make is like, everybody will recognize when pushed that like completely unconscious processes that you can tell about what keeps a species going never hit at the level of a person's conscious motivations. It's just a completely different story to say what replicates genes and what makes me get out of bed in the morning. And somehow I think the evolutionary psychologists, they creep a little close to that line, and then they're evasive about it because they'll be like, oh, no, we're not saying that's what he wants. Oh, it's like his subconscious impulses or something. And then they never quite have the right words. So it's just frustrating that that's always the go-to. And then maybe I'm just saying that it's often explanatorily inadequate. So, I don't know.
So something about, I don't know, recognize that what the limits of a theory or something like that.
Maybe, Why did we start that? What was I being...
Oh, sorry, because you talked about the example being sexy.
Sorry.
And I was like,
so that
is a correct use of the term because sex is not the same as mating.
Okay, good. So have we done the sex and mating point enough? Should we move to the second big idea?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll try. The fish, which we don't know how to pronounce, but is spelled, I'm going to say cichlid.
Cichlid, okay, cichlid.
It's spelled C-I-C-H-L-I-D, and we had really intended to Google pronounce before we started the video.
Yeah, but sometimes I do think Googling things to find out the answer is cheating.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Do you want to pronounce it in a different way? So
I'd
the
say
audience has
cichlid.
two options. Cichlid, like C-Y-C.
Yeah, like the H was a K. I don't know why.
Imagine it's going to turn out to be cichlid.
Cichlid.
So, okay.
Or Haplochromos bertoni.
Yeah, that's easier to pronounce it by its technical science name. So this idea is that, let me try and then you correct me because I think you get this better than me, is the idea that the T, what you might call the T determinist, or that you can object to that word because it has a baggage, but the person who thinks T comes first and kind of drives male behavior, an interesting objection to that, is to mobilize evidence to show that sometimes T comes first and can cause or at least prompt certain behavior, but sometimes the environment comes first and causes T.
Yes. Yes.
And if that's true, this sort of like T first explanatory line is just like blowing up.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And T can't be an essence.
Yes, T can't be an essence.
Yeah.
Yeah. The male.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, so what's the male now?
Yeah.
That's just a reaction to an environment.
Yes. And what was one of the examples was the fish that we don't know how to say?
Yeah. The fish, so what is it? In this species, there are a few that get the territory.
Yeah,
there are females,
maybe separate territories. One gets it.
And
territory is resources and mating opportunities, I think. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And so what happened? Okay, no, so I think there were two interesting observations.
Yeah.
One was that if you castrate the male, the like territorial male fish along with the resources and the mating opportunities.
Yep.
It remains the dominant fish.
Yep.
So even though it has like flatline T levels,
yep,
it still has the status of dominant.
Yep.
So that was the first observation. The second observation is that is that when you put the fish, when you put the fish in a different, so take that dominant fish, put it in a different environment, put it in an environment with a bigger male fish, and it will lose its status.
Yeah.
And also it will lose its its flashy markings.
Yep, and go beige.
And it will go beige, very boring.
Yep.
And also it's, okay, so here's the, by moving him into a community with only females and smaller males, the neurons that direct gonadal growth expand and his testes, the primary source of testosterone production, enlarge. In other words, the T-Rex scenario places the chain of events precisely the wrong way around.
Right.
Yes, so we thought that was pretty cool. Yeah, I mean, isn't it? That's pretty amazing, isn't it?
It's amazing.
The testes change as the environment changes.
Yeah.
Wow.
So you've got a beta fish getting the opportunity of being the dominant, the alpha fish, and then his own internal mechanisms are somehow prompted by this change in environment to make him
the alpha
fish.
That's
in
right.
terms of his, yeah.
So it's not, he doesn't get the resources because he's alpha.
Right.
He gets into the alpha position. He gets into the alpha position. He gets the resources, and then he becomes alpha.
It's really astonishing, isn't it? And that does really turn the narrative on its head, because I think even if there's some sophisticated story about like males have T, but now we need to offer you a complicated story about T distribution between males and the intramale competition, you're still going to predict like, yeah, the highest or best of T ones are going to be the ones that win.
Yeah.
Where winning is whatever is like relevant to that species and its ecosystem or whatever.
Reproductive success.
This is just like, no. And sorry, was it this book or was it in Fine that there was a discussion of the dads?
I think it was in Fine.
It was
yes.
in Fine, right. So that's another version of it that like testosterone levels, right? Is it in men?
When they do,
when they're spending more time doing childcare, like they have their own families and they're spending more time at home with the children, the testosterone levels reduce or something like that.
Yeah.
And so again, that was like T in the body being kind of responsive and adaptive to very like contextually specific environmental cues or whatever.
Yeah. So interesting.
Very interesting that causation can run in either direction. And again, I think so much of what I kept getting out of this book was like, man, it's like it's way more complicated than the T-Rex story, not just for humans, but in every case of every animal you can really go through and tell this more complex story about how all these...
Yeah, that's right. First, it's like it is actually more complicated often, as in like, once the studies are replicated or whatever.
Yes.
You know, there was like, what are the studies about? And the Bateman and also the birds, there was so much... female promiscuity, it turned out.
Yes, that's right.
Maybe
they check the DNA of the chicks or whatever.
Yeah, it's like, actually there are lots of...
The monogamous bird species.
So yeah, that's right. So it's more complicated in terms of what's actually going on, and also that makes, and we should expect to see that on reflection. Yeah. But is it interesting though that the testes, the like size changes in response to the status of dominant? Is that something noteworthy?
What?
I don't know what the note is.
It just seems to you like it's...
Or like, because then there's still some relationship between dominance and testosterone, right?
I see. You're thinking it would be even more striking if the little beta guy with his medium-sized testicles could be dominant rather than that the environment provokes his testicles to get bigger.
Or like, why is it in response to dominance or lack thereof that the testes change? What's that about? Yeah.
I mean, the only thing I can think of is Hooven has the discussion of the red stags, right? And there's this kind of there's the thing about how they're really like, they're pacing together to figure out whether to go head to head. And is that supposed to be something where like it's a very nuanced environmental mechanism, because it's only when the stag somehow determines that from this pacing competition it's the more manly one, that's somehow the thing where it will like do the fight.
Okay.
But then can she tell some story about how it has to all be scaffolded, that those dispositions are in place? Like testosterone's the thing that's going to make it able to determine that sensitive like chance of winning and then be willing to fight to the death. I don't know. I'm just thinking, if so, then you could say like the environment causes the T, but it has to like cause the T, because then once there is this rush of T, it scaffolds certain capacities or whatever.
Okay.
Because the new territorial fish has to defend its territory, has to mate.
Except, I guess that, but I was thinking, but as we know from the first observation, you can remain dominant once you're castrated and don't have, and your T levels are lower.
Yes, and that's probably the only thing in the book that I really got tripped up by, though.
Yeah, okay.
Just for this, like, because it seemed to me that there were alternative explanations available for that weren't really about the fact that, like...
No, it's not about, because it's not about that fish. Could just be, like, the other fish still, like, you've got the territory.
Exactly.
The other fish expect you to have, to be, like, I'm just as good at defending it as...
Yeah, and in previous altercations, I don't know how fish have altercations, but in previous altercations, you have established dominance.
That's right.
So you're probably safe for a while.
Yeah.
And so to me, it's not so striking that you could, like, castrate a fish and he remains dominant, meaning he keeps his territory, unless somehow fish are like constantly with the battling. Like maybe if you're getting...
Oh yeah, and like you just get knocked back and then you just go again.
Yeah, like if you're always getting questioned rather than like you establish dominance.
And you teach everyone, I'm the leader.
Yeah. If it's every day or every hour contestations, then the fact that you're castrated and lack the thing that might make you aggressive or strong enough in the fight,
gonna quickly emerge.
Quickly might emerge, yeah. So I don't know, that would depend on the facts of the fish societies. Yeah. So what are our, like, is there anything with you where when you read this or you read both books together or after, or maybe when we came to writing the review or whatever, that you ended up thinking other outstanding, like interesting questions that still need to be resolved, or is there anything that you're left with wondering about after this?
I think I just... the question that I have, I mean, maybe it's just not a very constructive question, is like, why is the myth so powerful?
Yes.
I think, and I guess that was partly maybe reflected in like my experience of the dynamic between Hoover and Fine. Like Fine anticipates it. You know, at the start of the book, she's like, I'm out to show that what T-Rex is dead, or or I'm out to, like, I don't know, kill it once and for all. And then she acknowledges, like, I will not be successful, like, so powerful is this myth.
Yes. That's right. No doubt testosterone Rex will survive the savaging it receives in this book. Continue to linger on in the public and scientific imagination. I don't know, and maybe that's a pragmatic question. Like maybe the question behind it is like, okay, so how do we get that shift? Or like how do we I mean, and maybe the answer to that is an alternative. And actually, I think Fine says it to most of it's like an alternative store. Like, what do we need? Like, if this will not convince people, what will? Yeah.
Or to be at least more open-minded.
Oh, it's a great question. Like, what would actually shift it? Because my impulse is to say that, like, it's not really T-Rex itself. It's that we have this, like, really old pre-science, right? Even those experiments where they figured out what hormones were.
Yeah.
We just have this really long sense that men and women are different and men are better. It's really hard to get rid of this entrenched social hierarchy like that. And how have other groups done it, like racial groups?
Yeah.
They've kind of done it by demonstration, like doing all the jobs that they were said to be too inferior for.
But that doesn't seem to work for women.
And it can't work in the same way, like, at least, you know, in sport or something, you can be black or white and show that you're equally good.
Yeah.
But there are bodily differences with women that mean they can't just show, in some cases, that they are the same, because they're not the same.
Yeah.
In some ways. Bodily and on average.
Yeah.
But I'm just thinking, like, so what? It's not so. Sorry, I'm saying it all in a jumbled way. But like, it's not that T-Rex is the myth. It's that there's this myth of extreme difference. It serves dominant interests to keep that myth in place, because it keeps the status quo and people in their privileged positions. T-Rex is one powerful way to prop it up, because it gives a scientific veneer to the myth being true.
Yeah.
And so it's in a lot of people's interest to keep it or to vindicate it.
Yeah.
Which, again, I think is part of my sense of what makes it sad that Hooven's fighting for the myth. And this is my feminist, the feminist complaint, that it's just, I find it personally sad when women are fighting on the other side. And I know that's not how they would see it.
Yeah.
And I think you're probably right that, if she was to defend herself, she might say she's fighting for her son, or she's fighting for men who have been much maligned, or she really believes in difference and complementarity and thinks the rest of us are being absurd.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think better. I feel like I understand a little bit better. I'm more sympathetic to it, because I think I was a sameness feminist about sport before the should trans women be in women's sport question. I guess it came at no cost then. I suppose I was a little bit raised under that slogan. I think, you can do it too.
Yeah, I remember you being
that's real. And I would have talked about it in all of those ways, right? I would have said, oh, it's so sad to talk about, think about what you could be denying women when you talk about, the limits that their biology imposes. So, I would have talked about, let's err on the side of hopefulness. And I'm not saying, and I sort of still think, that's not totally out of place.
Yep.
But I guess when there did start to be a little bit of a cost.
Interesting.
That, and that was a learning experience for me too. Maybe it was cheap and easy for me to do it beforehand. I don't know. But I did really then have to think to take seriously the biological differences and then what justice is for women.
Yes, but so your point is if I take that a bit more seriously outside of sport, the Hooven and all the different feminists,
I think they have a claim to justice too,
in a sense, because the scientific question still remains somewhat open, and if they're right, it just leads to a different conception of what justice for women looks like. We have to just all remain open about that and having that debate.
Yeah, and I know you're going to say that, yes, but so many of those questions are not open, or there's so much evidence against the assumptions or the conclusions. So that's one thing. I guess I was really just thinking about this framing of the just one side. It's the fine side is the justice side, and the Hooven side is not.
Yeah, no,
I know that's not quite what you're. That's also an unfair characterization of you.
But at least the difference for me is that I don't feel the way about the different feminists that I feel about Hooven's book.
Oh,
so for me, I'm just slightly trying
to
reconcile. Because I definitely take that point.
No, because I think you take the difference feminists seriously.
Yeah, and I think we agree about the plural, how pluralist feminism needs to be, in the way that it needs to be a movement for and about all women.
Yeah.
And then you can't just be a weird, dedicated sameness leftist feminist or whatever and exclude everyone else. So I'm still trying to put my finger on what's the difference.
Yeah, you're not thinking about
Hooven,
I don't think Hooven's feminist.
Because I don't think Hooven is a feminist.
Yeah.
There's nothing in the book to indicate that she is fighting for women or in women's interests. And then it looks like she's coming in, this goes right back to the start, she's coming in, she's reasserting an old position that feminists have been working really hard to tackle and object to, and she's doing it in a way that doesn't even engage with or show like any kind of
That work.
intellectual respect to any of their work.
Yeah.
And that then we have this experience of like Fine has replied to Hooven somehow 5 years earlier.
Yeah.
And so somehow, yeah, I think my frustration is like, it's not quite about ways of doing feminism. It's like there is this T-Rex is plausibly part of propping up the patriarchal status quo.
Yeah.
And it's just, I hate when women help. Maybe that's not fair, but that is my feeling. I feel like, why are some women helping them?
Well, I mean, yeah, to go another way, I guess it just, does it also just seem so consistent with what we see with our eyes? The T-Rex view. Men are like this, women are like that.
I mean, T is just one possible explanation of that. It
No,
seems consistent with our eyes that men and women are different.
Yes. Yeah.
But I think the feminist point is like, or it actually should be anyone's point. Everyone's point should be when two things look different, there's an explanatory question of why.
Yeah.
And then the feminist has a hypothesis about why. It's a lot and maybe even all socialization.
Yeah.
And your T is one way of telling the story, like, oh, it's entirely natural or innate or biological or whatever you want to say, and this is the hormone by which it is achieved. But you could tell some other scientific story.
So then and the feminists do have an answer, right? Like socialization, they can point to lots of the mechanisms. Toys is just one
delusions
of
of
them.
So many more years earlier than this.
So then
book.
why does the T story still have such a grip?
Yes.
Because there is now something of a rival, isn't there? Socialization. Is it just that the course of action on this is much more imaginable and easier to take than the course of action on this? Yeah, is it that we feel paralyzed or enfeebled by the socialization story?
Because it's so much injustice and so big to dismantle.
Yes.
We somehow prefer to not believe it, because if the different story is true on whatever scientific underpinning you want to give, you don't need to do very much to make the world better.
That's how it seems to me.
So it's lazy. People just being lazy.
A little bit, or lacking in ambition.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, okay. It's interesting because so many people work on these problems in research, right? Like many different disciplines are somehow contributing to the sex differences or not question, and so that would be there's a sense in which it would be a lot of people to not be telling the truth or to be doing highly motivated research. Like if we end up converging as a research community on the idea that like, okay, well, yeah, no, we are really different.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people taking this like lazy, low ambition. And would they? I mean, I don't know. Maybe.
I guess isn't that, you feel overwhelmed in the face of the implications, and so you turn elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it would be interesting to know if this has happened for other movements, or has it been that for other movements they were able to establish their equality well enough that they didn't then get to this point of intractability, like with racism, with sexual orientation, with religion. Like, is it that you could just show that you were the same in such a decisive way that it's only the question of the sexes that remains intractable, and because there is the real difference in the body?
I'm tempted to say no. Like, I wonder if we're reading that from the present. Do you know what I mean? Like, maybe it was really just, it was so different for them. Or maybe it seemed so intractable for them too at that moment.
Right, but then why didn't they?
No, and it's just,
if that's true,
I don't think any other case is quite the
same.
same as men. No one else talks about this, like, two very different, complementary, I mean, we don't describe any other relations like that, do we?
Well, no, and if
any other hierarchical
relations.
More,
I'm sure that there has been that kind of rhetoric for slaves and exploited labour, that they are more suited to.
Sure, but is it still quite this, like, different in kind?
I'm sure it would have been. I'm thinking, even now in rich countries where you have the like ethnicities that are the
Okay, but there
immigrants and
is some
the-
difference. Okay, so maybe it's not difference in kind, but like, but then it was. But was there ever this kind of like, yeah, in kind, but also like, that's harmonious.
No.
The slave,
Yeah.
and that's not really hierarchical. Is that what is part of too? Like, is that why we counted all this stuff about men and women because we think it's not really wrong.
Yeah. I think that's definitely a sneaky part of it. Like, I don't imagine that. Again, I might just not know enough about the history, but I don't imagine that like in Qatar or wherever they have the like house, like the immigrant population that are really just doing the like house slavery or whatever,
Yeah.
totally exploited labor class, that they're trying to pretend also that it's not a hierarchy.
No,
and that
that's
we are
right.
equals.
Yeah.
So maybe that's
yeah.
like a novel
You're
propaganda.
both full persons, just in different ways.
Unique skill sets.
Yeah,
wonderful
both
cleaning.
contributing. Yeah. Really, you're both helping each other.
Yeah, no, that's true. So maybe that's the novelty of the question of the sexes, is this justifying propaganda that has a veneer of equality behind it, and that causes everyone to be like more at ease with it, or women to be disarmed in seeing it as an injustice or fighting it, or.
Yeah.
But again, then we're just advancing the sameness view, aren't we?
Yes. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. What were the questions you were left with?
I don't know actually. I think the only thing is the thing we said sort of towards the end of our review, that like it would be good to hear a direct fight between a socialization, that's not like a T-Rex person and a feminist like Fine who can tell a story that brings in the evolutionary history,
Yeah.
but also knows what role socialization and enculturation are playing, and just to get a more clear speaking to each other over this question of like what role testosterone is actually playing in scaffolding or priming or
Yeah.
whatever in which of men's behavior,
Yeah.
and like a direct response from the T person as to like why they think or what role they see cultural institutions or laws or
Yeah.
upbringing and stuff
Yeah.
as playing. Because I think we ended up sort of
I would
articulating
really like to know that.
that one way we tried to articulate their view right was that they kind of think, but for all of these other things in the individual's life,
Men would be like this.
he would be like this. Yeah, so
Yeah.
he is kind of an aggressive, violent,
Yeah.
promiscuous beast.
Yeah.
And if he's got good enough laws, like in Singapore, or he's got a good enough mum who
Yeah.
really makes him virtuous and treats women well,
Yeah.
then he'll be kind of kept a lid on.
Yeah.
But otherwise,
And we should really celebrate him.
Yes, for being one of the good ones
Yeah.
or whatever. And I can see that like the more that is true, the more we should like be grateful for the good ones and the hard work of the mothers that produce the good boys. I hear women say this, that they're making I think Phyllis Schlafly said this, that it was a huge contribution to raise good sons.
Right.
And that's kind of
I had
overlooked.
never thought about that as but good, but like against their natures.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah. Like that's actually really feminist work, and it's work that women are doing like every day in their own homes, raising good men.
I wonder if that's really how it's against their natures. Is that?
I just don't buy that, because I don't buy that whole, and I think sameness, feminists in general, just don't have that picture, and maybe a lot of them just don't have it for dogma reasons. I think at least I have enough of a sense of the science that I don't have it for also scientific reasons. But the alternative is this much more plasticity view we had earlier on, or that humans are adaptable in hugely surprising ways. I just would love to see that fight had directly and defended by two like really good advocates of those positions, just to see what's the best that could be said by the T guy. Because I'm really not buying it at this point.
Who would that be? I guess that's what we were hoping
Good
for.
question about who that would be. Yeah, we were. Yeah. That's what we expected to find in the pairing of the books. But maybe another book, and we'll come along.
Yeah.
And then we can do the video.
Yeah.
Okay.
We can use our cool studio again.
Yeah. Leave us a comment complimenting us on our beautiful studio, please. We're seeking only positive feedback.
That's right.
On the aesthetics of our new production values. Yeah, thanks. It was good to.
Because of the importance of the role of the environment.
Really good point.
Mm.
Really good connecting everything together at the end. And maybe tell us if you think we need to get real flowers. I think we should. I think we should get Lego flowers. That's my real aspiration.
Wow.
Maybe we have a wine
That can be achieved.
at some point when we're both
And then we build the Lego flowers in the video. And we subject people to it. Do you know what? That's a great idea. Yeah. And there's a winner. Okay, this is a reality TV show.
I was thinking we do that separately as a fun activity rather than like with our small talk live.
No, it's true, because also it could get, well, like, that's how games go down in my family.
When things get hostile.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And then we tell our...
things fall apart quickly.
We'll be taking a 7-month hiatus while Kate calms down. Because I built the lotus flower
we're still friends. We just have different priorities. And there'll be someone else in my chair.
Okay, goodbye.
See you.